So thank you. We are here, April 9th. This was the day, hello if you don't know me, I'm Jennifer Prince, the MFA program director here, that I remember sharing with our 5 candidates, I think back in November, and being like, this will be the day when you have the opening reception. It's the day before the deadline for your written thesis and sign off on defenses. And it felt like it was so long ago. But now here we are. So thank all of you for coming out today for the first part of the celebration. We'll begin here over the next hour with presentations from each of the candidates, and then we can go out for the actual opening reception at the museum, just right outside the door, and of course to see their installation inside of the museum. Each candidate will speak, and we'll just flow one from the other. There we go. With a dramatic pause. We'll go one from the other, so I ask that you will please save your questions to the end, and then we'll have time at the end for some question and answers. Each will be speaking about the ideas, techniques, and concepts behind their work, and I think you're in for quite a treat. So our first speaker is Remi Roce. So Remi, if you'll come up.
Yeah, the lights worked. Nice. All right. Hello, everyone. This is the title of my thesis. I have always been fascinated by what happens when our communities fall apart, when one or several pillars crumble, when one foundation is struck. Who are you and what do you have left? If humans are an interconnected web of hearts and minds leaning on each other and raised by the village, what right does one have to sever that tie? What if it's necessary to protect yourself? Is it fair to those around you whose lives you even innocuously affect to remove yourself from the community and to leave the collective memory? My art asks the viewer to engage with their own understanding of identity, culture, place, and home. No two people have the same exact definition of these, and in my sculpture, video, and installations, I exploit that disconnect. Who are we when no one is looking? Who are we in the minds of others? This discordance has historically led to strife and isolation, but on a personal scale, I believe this allows for a much deeper understanding of the realms in which we occupy. I found there's a freedom in the isolation of the individual. I consider community not to be our relationships with other people, but with how our physical being interacts with the world. In this thesis exhibition, I explore community as the intersection between the sublime and the mundane. The sublime in Kantian philosophy is the sense of grandeur and awe. It's what we feel when watching a thunderstorm or when looking up at the stars, not just the vastness, but the power behind it. What sets the sublime apart from mere beauty is the element of fear. It's a little unnerving and it makes you feel small. The mundane, however, isn't known for its fear or power. It's the everyday, the boredom, the humdrum, the banal. It's your drive to work. It's deciding what to make for dinner every single night until you die. It's not big, but it's omnipresent. Now, traditionally, these two ideas are seen as diametrically opposing forces. But what I present here is that there are times where they can be seen to merge. By capturing these moments on film, I hope to create a continuous record to possibly find common denominators. Now, these last 3 slides are stills that didn't make it into the final cut of this exhibition. I use older camera filters to evoke nostalgia and help suspend disbelief. Too often we take film as truth and whole. We don't let ourselves become submerged into the meaning of what's being shown. What I present isn't overly complicated and shots tend to drag on, but it allows the viewer to sit and stay with what the footage is trying to say, rather than just perceiving the surface layer of what's being shown. Now, what exactly I film is kind of hard to explain. I try to locate and document these times where the sublime seems to be more accessible. I've been calling this the breath of a moment. Through isolation and contemplation, these moments seem to pop out, and hopefully I'm able to film them as they come up. For the sake of the gallery, I create installations for my work. Sometimes they're simple projections on a wall, allowing lights to bounce back and fully envelop the viewer. But sometimes there are a few more elements. They all point to a state of calm and introspection, providing a space to be within a work rather than compared to just seeing it with your eyes. This relationship is vital to understanding what's being presented. Is it possible that when we look closely and carefully enough, we can see through that veil? If we can quietly let ourselves be within a moment, within the ordinary, we can see extraordinary things. Thank you all for coming today, and I would like to present Lynne Hudson.
Hello. I can't even remember my name. Hi all, I'm Lynne Hudson, and the work in my thesis is called Intervallum, and it is the space between. And I want to thank you all for being here and being willing to be in that space with us today. That's where my work lives, and it's what I'd like to tell you about. Many of us in this room experienced Hurricane Helene, and so we all share a part of the story that I'm going to share. The hurricane brought us to the same place, but at the same time, I grew up in a small town in eastern North Carolina, and it's a place I call home, even though I haven't lived there in over 30 years. And in the aftermath of the hurricane, I had to return there. So while this community was still pulling itself back together, I was standing in a different kind of wreckage. My father died and my family began to fracture. I found myself living inside two griefs at the same time. They didn't explain one another, they were just parallel. While living inside both of these griefs, I documented the rural landscapes that were so familiar to me, and what I was capturing was a different kind of destruction. It was something that took slow decades for it to happen. And the elderly population where I grew up, we all left in the 80s. We all kind of, and I was part of this, we believed in the same narrative that in order to survive, we had to go somewhere else to live. And so by doing that, now the generational memory is disappearing in that area. So basically I was part of that before I even started documenting them when I came back. Yifu Tuan speaks of the love of place, and he explains that connection that I have to the land at home. It's watching a storm make its way across the forest and the flat lands and seeing it come from miles away. It's the sound of quail calling each other in the dusk, and it's those dry, cracked puddles, mud puddles that have no water, and the silt is so fine that it sticks to your bare feet for days and days. Tuan also writes about our deeper connection to specific landforms like mountains, valleys, and islands. Connections that go back to memories of shelter and survival, awe and wonder. I understand that differently now, having lived in these mountains, and both places have gotten into me. And I don't feel that as a contradiction, I feel like it's the point. The photographs that I use are not just documentation, they're artifacts of grief. The black and white and all the weight that carries. The images are obscured by plastic printed with hurricane destruction, layered over abandoned homes that I grew up with. Place names like Bloody Fork, names I never questioned as a child that only seem strange now with their meaning lost in the generational memory. These are the places that shaped me. This is post-diluvium. This is my artifacts of artifacts. 1 year after the storm, I returned to the Shenandoah River in Asheville, where I had photographed the destruction. It was cleaner, but it was not empty. I chose 4 artifacts from the debris, and I'd love to tell you there was something magical about those 4 pieces. Basically, they didn't have snakes or bugs in them. When I brought them back to the studio, I cast them with flax paper. And paper holds memory. It holds both the memory of the pulp and the memory of the object that's being cast. It keeps some of the pigment and the texture, and it also will keep traces of something that was in there. What you see is the object as well as the copy of it. Holding pieces of the aftermath is what it felt like when I was doing this. I used discarded wood from Cullowhee and from my family farm in Bertie County. I found a connection with that because what my father and my grandfather had used in the labor and the land, I was using now to create a different story. So what does it feel like to cast ruin in paper, to hold that and preserve it? I'm still figuring that out. My material practice focuses on paper and paper pulp, specifically using abaca and flax. And I use sheet casting to do the sculptures, and I use pulp paint to create the marks. These are tests that I did to show, to see what was happening with different fabrics before I ended up with the silk panels. And then also, you can paint on the plastic and then pull it up and use that to create layers, which everyone here, almost everyone here knows I love layers. Many people who see my finished work assume I painted on top of either the paper or the fabric, but I haven't. I'm painting with the paper. The wet pulp, again, mostly abaca, is applied directly to the surface, and so it becomes the mark, and the pulp becomes the paint. Scale changes everything. This is when I was working in my studio with the piece that you'll see in the museum called Routt. It's the same mark floor to ceiling, because if I have a mark in a small book, which I also love making, it becomes something different when it becomes this big. And that shift in scale for me can hold grief in a different way. These are the panels in the museum, and with these I'm creating what I feel rather than what I see. O'Keeffe said something very similar. What's specific to my practice is the material. Pulp painted on silk carries transparency, weight, and memory all at once. I'm not just representing it, I'm making it physical. The panels are blue, and it's an obvious reference to water, but also for me, blue is the color of memory. The abstract marks are harder to quantify. They come from the movement of my body and with the pulp dancing around the panels on the floor. And I think most people in my cohort can say, yes, she does dance around the panels of the floor, because even if I close my door, people come in and see me doing this. The scale allows you to enter the space of grief or whatever emotion you bring with it. You don't have to share mine, but you have to be willing to stand inside for a moment. With this work, I'm asking, what do we actually do in the aftermath? Do we mend and repair? Do we abandon? Do we sit in the rubble? I'm more willing than most to sit in that uncomfortable space without resolving it, to give it a different type of attention and share that, because I think the questions deserve more time than we usually give them. These pieces don't ask you to feel better, they ask you to stay a little longer than is comfortable, and I do too. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Brooklin Routt.
Hi y'all, I'm Brooklin, as Lynne introduced. To begin this talk, I want to build a foundation of who I am and where I come from. A little about me now, I am originally from Eastern Kentucky, but transplanted to Waynesville for graduate school. I went to Morehead State University for my MFA in Studio Arts, with minors in art history and photography. Growing up in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky, I was quite the carefree child. I loved to be outside, and I was fascinated with nature. My parents made sure that my sister and I could have the best childhood we could, even when they were going through difficult times themselves. My parents divorced when I was quite young. On the weekends, we'd spend our time at our dad's. Once every couple months, he would be on call for the electric company he worked for. When we were really little, we would go on trouble calls with him and sit in the truck while he restored electric for folks. Because of this, I became really interested in power lines and how they worked. I got to the point that I was spotting things that were wrong with the lines as we were driving down the road, and I'll come back to talk a little bit more about this a little later on. And yes, that is me up in the bucket photographing my dad. During the week, I would stay at my mom's and attend school at a small rural public school called Blaine Elementary. My mom's boyfriend at the time, and now my stepdad, Paul, worked for a coke plant in management for maintaining coke ovens. The coke plant was affiliated with AK Steel of Ashland, Kentucky, the last steel mill in the city. In 2011, the coke plant closed with less than a year's notice, forcing Paul to commute to and from Pittsburgh twice a week for work. During this period, we hardly saw him, and it left my mom once again to care for us as a single mom family. Now, I know this is going to feel a little disjointed, but I'm going to pivot now to some of the work I have made here in grad school. I promise it will all make sense by the end. When I first got here, I struggled to find my footing. I had just left everyone and everything I'd known behind to be here. I started to look back on my life, specifically my childhood, and I started using my archive of photos in combination of my family's archive to create these images to start to talk about who I am as a person and where I come from. Although I love this work, it still felt like it was missing something. For me, that was process, and also a bit more of the personal aspect. I was kind of beating around the bush and hiding, and trying to make work that I thought others wanted to see. From there, I started to work in installation again. This was a pivotal moment in my practice. I realized, one, I am not a 2D artist, and two, I want to make work about Appalachia and where I'm from. This piece was discussing the precariousness of Appalachian culture, or Appalachia, in the greater landscape of the industrialized world. I wanted to highlight how tied into the land we are here, and how what humans do affect the ecosystems. This work was a precursor to what you will see in the museum today. Let's see if I can get this to play. It's just a quick. All right. The following semester, I learned mold making and porcelain slip casting. This was kind of an aha moment for me. It allowed for me to create objects of sameness. I started making insulators because of their familiarity to me. Because of my dad working for the electric company, he also collects them. As a kid, I was always excited when he brought home a new one because they were all so different. And the sameness of the casts led me to personify them in a way. I also wanted to incorporate photography on them. I used the cyanotype process to add this imagery to the surface, permanently hardening the photos into the porcelain. These photos on the slide show These photos on the slide show different phases of the very long process of making each insulator. Now that I had more of a process I wanted to use, I started reflecting more on my home and most importantly, my family. I began to reflect on how different industries impacted my life. The two major players were the steel and the oil industry. The photos on the insulators depict my life and my family's lives through their lenses. It shows all of the joyous moments despite the hardships and poverty we faced because of the exodus of industry from the area. The blue hue of the cyanotype represents the stress and worry that was ever present in their lives throughout my childhood, though they protected my sister and I from that as best they could. The whole installation of power poles and lines represent the entrance of the outside world into Appalachia, with that, the industrialization of Appalachia. They have been quiet witnesses to the cycles of exploitation here and witnesses to the joy and the community that reside within eastern Kentucky. This work, through the telling of my story through my and my family's lens, represents a culture of resilience that I see prevalent all throughout Appalachia, though I can better speak of my area. Most of us have an attitude of make do with what you have, and keep pushing and find joy in the little things and the strong roots we have to one another in this area. The repurposed wood of the poles and the fabric with memory help to highlight this ideology. We repurpose things until they can no longer be used. We reuse clothes to make quilts or patch other clothes. We reuse scrap wood to build fences or feed troughs, both things I've seen my family do throughout my life. This work is not meant to be a sob story. but a highlight of the hope and resilience of my family and Appalachian culture when faced with persistent hardships. This work is also an invite for further conversations of hope and resilience, and an invitation for you to be vulnerable, share your stories, and be proud of where you come from. Thank you to my committee for all of your guidance, my family for literally everything, my wife and friends for your continuous support. Without you, this work would not be. And thank you for your time. Up next is Holly Goodall.
Hello. Let me get my bearings. Okay. Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it, and I just want to extend my gratitude and thanks to the faculty here at the university and my cohort and some of the best people that I know, and also to my parents who are not here but at home, Mary and Richard Hill. And I want to thank my friends and extended family for coming today and supporting all of us here. And did you know that material practice is critical knowledge? Tell us more. Let's talk about it. To get us started, I wanted to share a quote that's really become the backbone to my thesis. It's by Lynne Hudson, a cognitive scientist who writes, "Humans create their cognitive powers by creating the environments in which they exercise those powers." Now, I know that might sound a little academic, and you might think you're in the wrong thesis presentation, but just stay with me, okay? We don't just use our brains to think. We build the conditions that make thinking possible in the first place. Hutchins is pushing against this idea of thinking that thinking only happens in your head. Thinking happens through making, way before. We think with tools, through spaces, within systems of language. We think with other people. So cognition is not just internal, it's distributed. Stay with me. For artists, this lands in a very, very real way. The studio isn't just a place where ideas get executed, it's part of how thinking actually happens. Materials, process, and repetition, and become active participants in cognition. When you're stitching or drawing or building or carving, you're not just making something. You're working through ideas in real time. Meaning emerges through doing. The hand, the material, and the environment, they all think together. And that realization became the foundation of my thesis. And it led me to a central question. How have women's bodies and labor been shaped? And do these systems persist? That question unfolds here in two bodies of work. One is a series of sculptural female totems I call herms, built from layers of textile, paper, and found materials. And the other is a grouping of drawings that layer garment, patterns, gender, and code. Conceptually, my work focuses on the ways women's bodies and labor have been defined. This is developed into multiple bodies of work. I'm going to go to the next slide. I also want to say the work in my studio has become less about producing finished objects and more about building and understanding through the process of making. The sculptural figures here that are herms, I think of them as women, as witnesses, and as keepers of what's been carried, of what's seen, of what we hold. But before I go a little bit further, I want to pause and thank my professor, Seth McCormick, for introducing me to the word herb. And for those of you who may be new to the lingo, what exactly is a herm, you might ask? Well, let me introduce you to these two dashing fellows. Circa the Greeks, herm sculptures originated in ancient Greece, traditionally representing the god Hermes. I am focusing on what they were used for, that idea of a boundary marker, of guardians, of watchers. So with that consideration, I felt these figures were very much like my sculptures, and I would be the one to bring the term herms back, new and improved as a woman. Each one contains its own archive of materials chosen for its tactile memory and emotional resonance, including threads and prints and fabric pieces, paper, porcelain. These figures, the domestic and the handmade, I'm trying to push them into the contemporary space of sculpture. I often make loose sketches of my sculptures, and in doing this, another question sort of cropped up for me. I found myself leaning into my own historical past of rendering and drawing. This is the human form and sort of what we put on it. I was a costume designer for 30 years. You can do the math on my age. And what systems and rules emerge that push us into these preconceived patterns was of a real interest to me. And this is where the second body of work begins to come forward, beginning with flat pattern pieces, objects that are sort of gender neutral until they're sewn. Question how femininity is constructed by design, cultural expectations, and outdated systems. A sleeve is just a sleeve. A body is a geometric problem. A bodice is a geometric problem, really. It's only when the pattern pieces are assembled into that garment, all of the cultural meaning attached to it begins to appear, and all of the neutrality dissolves. These garments suggest and move the wearer through expectations that are really anything but neutral. Through layering, fragmentation, the integration of Morse code, these works translate hidden messages about the female experience. Pattern is a system that promises neutrality while quietly organizing the body into a preordained correct form. I am disrupting this system, laying it out, and holding it still long enough to examine it. If we're operating under the theory of cognitive distribution, the traditional divide between art and craft doesn't really hold up. Not once you actually start making. Because if making produces knowledge, then craft is not secondary to art. It's one of the ways thinking and ideas enter the work. And we know material knowledge matters. Knowing how something behaves, how it holds, how it fails is foundational. Without it, there's no real engagement with form or concept. This has opened up how I work, not just in the studio, but also how I see myself and how I create. When you start to trust what you know through making, you stop looking outside yourself to define your worth or your art. Brené Brown, a researcher known for her work on vulnerability and belonging, writes, "Don't walk through the world looking for evidence that you don't belong because you will always find it. And don't walk through the world looking for evidence that you're not enough because you will always find that too." Our worth and our belonging are not negotiated with other people. We carry those inside our hearts. I know who I am, and I'm quite clear about that. I'm not going to negotiate that with you. Because then I may fit in for you, but I no longer belong to myself. That idea that your worth isn't something to be negotiated feels deeply connected to what artists create. Because in the studio, no one is handing you a clear measure of value. There is no system that tells you this matters and this doesn't. You have to decide that. You have to trust that what you're making, what you're drawn to, what you return to, has value. And that value doesn't come from outside. It comes from within the work that you do, within you. The answers we're looking for don't come from critique alone. Critique can point you in the direction. Remember, the understanding happens in the doing, in showing up, in making, in paying attention, in failing, and doing it again. So when I say material practice is critical knowledge, I mean the studio is where thinking happens with your hands, where knowledge is built over time with meaning, and it's not imposed, it's found, it's discovered. And my hope is that as you move through the gallery this evening, you make your own discoveries and create your own meanings, not just through my work, but through the work of this entire cohort, because what you're seeing isn't just a collection of objects. It's a record of how we've been thinking, not just in our heads, but through our making. Thank you for listening to me go on. Next, I would love to introduce you to Reese Siegfried.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reese Siegfried. I'm originally from Lawrenceburg, Pennsylvania, and I moved down here to do grad school, and I'm currently living in Waynesville, North Carolina. So first, I'm going to start off. All of the text you see in the background are all song lyrics that go to songs that inspired Clowntown. Specifically, the one that's in red is from 21 Pilots, and it's a few other different songs, but just want to point that out. Yeah. Okay. This is me. As a small child, I grew up in a home where my father was a narcissistic abuser. It wasn't a fun childhood, but in the moments that it was, most of those times took place at amusement parks. And I have my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mom to thank for that. Most of my summers were spent either outside or at Knoebels Amusement Resort in Pennsylvania, or Hershey Park. And then in 2019, I made a joke to my mom. I was like, wouldn't it be really funny if I applied to Hershey Park? And that joke turned into a 5-year career with the company, and 2 different bodies of work. Speaking of, I did work this ride. It's called Mini Pirate, and there's like a little handbrake that you have to go up to a wall that's still moving to make it fully stop. It's really fun. There was a kid that cried on it one time. All right, so this is one of the images from that first body of work that I mentioned. This one is not in the museum, but the other body of work that I mentioned is in the museum. This, though, is from a series called The In-Between. While I was working at Hershey, I gained very intimate knowledge of the different attractions that were there. In doing that, I was also able to see that at other amusement parks. So I started taking photographs of these spots and label them as the in-between. Because they're not places you normally look. They're different spots within the amusement parks that most of the time they want you not to look at, so your attention's dragged somewhere else. This specific spot is on Storm Runner at Hershey, which is a ride that I worked so many times. But this is the transfer track behind the station. And you actually walk under this. So every time you ride this roller coaster, you walk under it, but most people don't even realize it. But in doing that, I created a whole database for myself to be able to go back, look, and gather inspiration for my ceramic pieces. So now we move on to the meat of it all. So, Clowntown is a fake amusement park with fake animals using real trauma. When I got down here, my work beforehand was super dark and really depressing, and I was immediately homesick. I just moved 9 hours away from home, and I didn't have anybody else, and I didn't know anyone, and oh my god. So I was like, I cannot keep working with just black and gray and writing and, So I made Sandy the snake, which I don't have an image of him today, but he was my first clown snake, and he was this big old snake with bright colors and a balloon holding his head up. And he was about how the working industry just continuously beats you down. But there was that kind of silliness to it, where you couldn't get that first, until you sat down with him and realized that the balloon was tied as a noose and his head was slumped. So, now that I've got that, I'm going to tell you how I made this thing, using my friend Xavier the Coyote. I'm going to start on that one over there, all the way up to your left. So that is like day one of my process. I build these things out of clay. I start whole and solid. So when I'm in my studio, I am hitting and beating the clay into place. And then about, depending on how big the animal is, a week, maybe a day later, they turn out to look like this. All smoothed out with all the details. And the last detail I always do is their eyes. Once we get to the next slide, or a few slides later, I'm going to talk a little more about the eyes and why they're so important. Next, they dry for a while, and then they get loaded into the kiln. I fire my work up to cone 2, which is about 2,088 degrees. And whenever I have my bigger pieces, they go into the gas kiln, and those fires take about 4 days. So 2 preheat days, 1 day to get up to temperature, and then 1 full day of cooling. After they're out of the kiln, this specific guy needed to have his appendages put back on, so I use different epoxies and also some spray foam to get them to hold together again. And then I hand paint all of my creatures with latex house paint. And yeah. So now that we have a nice, really close-up view of this guy, I'm going to talk about his eyes. So if you know what a coyote looks like, you're going to realize that that's not what coyote eyes look like, but actually human eyes. So most of my creatures, if not all, there's only one instance where it's not true, and that is my turtle. They all have human eyes, and that is to make them look slightly uncanny and capture attention a little more. It also brings back the human aspect of them, because these animals aren't telling stories about animals. They're telling stories about my personal experience and my personal traumas, so that we can all talk about them together, and you can be able to share them with them too. Another really cool thing about some of the details on them, if there is blood within the installation, that is special effects blood that is actually used within the haunt industry. I am a haunt actor, so I needed to make sure that I was calling back to that too. So, now I'm going to introduce you to the 4 characters that are going to be in the museum that you will meet, starting off with Xavier. Xavier is specifically about my father and my experience living with him, and the aftermath that he caused me to have. He is the worst plate turner ever known to man, and has dropped all of them. And he's really upset about it and is taking it out on himself. Next we got Forbes. Forbes is a little skunk, and he is very shy about his body. And every day he looks in the mirror and he goes, does my butt look big? Does it? And he's very self-conscious, but he's about body dysmorphia. I've been experiencing that since I was a little child, and now more than ever with the introduction of skin culture coming back within the media, I have felt it even more. Next up is little Penelope. Penelope is a sweet little lamb, and she is laying on her favorite baby blanket, and unfortunately today is the first day she got her period. So she is about that moment of, oh shit, now what? I was 13 when I got my first period, and I was in my favorite khaki skirt in 7th grade. And then I went off the testosterone for about 2 years. Didn't have my period, and then a few years later I went off of it and had my first ever period again. and it was here at Western, and we were in class. I was wearing black paint, so I learned. Last is Willow. Willow's in her favorite cotton candy cart in there, and she has a big surprise for you all. So I recommend you go and check her out. But she is about hope and overcoming the past. And I hope you all come see me later and share your experiences of overcoming the past and your hope. I want to thank all of my committee, but specifically Heather May, who talked to me in Sacramento in 2021 at Antica, and she's the reason I'm here. I want to thank my mom, my sister, my grandmother, who are all in Pennsylvania right now, and I want to thank my wife, Brooklyn, and I want to thank Victoria, Finn, Bobby, and Parks for being in the cast of Clowntown at Revolve. And then down at the bottom, that's Hartley, that's my little niece. I want to thank her because she's so cute and she makes me smile. So here's my contact information. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jennifer, you want to come up and then I'll go over the rest of the cohort, and we'll go into questions.
I think we'll turn the lights back up.
Also, this is Moffat.
Shall we give everyone another round of applause? So what are your questions? You just made it through 5 really amazing presentations.
A lot of you guys had brought the process as being really important in your work, and I've noticed that as someone, this is my first semester actually doing art classes here at Western, I've noticed that a lot of time I get caught up in almost the final product rather than maybe thinking more about the process, and I was wondering maybe what kind of helped you guys think about the process a little bit more in that way.
Great question.
I can take this one. For me, I start thinking of my work as play before I start thinking about the final product. And that helps me get into process a bit more. But there's no really right way to make art. So if you have a final product in mind, that is also another way of working, which is also nice. But play is my biggest thing. I try to think of everything as play. It makes it more fun.
What about you?
Well, I could have stood up here and talked about process the whole time because that's my happy place. Yeah, for me, it's the making and the making as many mistakes or things that are wrong as possible. And that sounds weird to say, but that's how I find out what the next thing is going to be. And I know sometimes that's hard. We have deadlines, we have things we have to meet, we have critiques. But just leaning into what's going to happen if I try this? What happens if I do this? This is sure to fail, but let's see what happens. And the more failures I had, the more successes I had. So,
What she said. Other questions? Well, we did a really good job. Yes.
Lynne, could you reiterate or tell more about the pigment and pouring process for your paper pulp creations? I would like to hear you talk more about it.
yeah, so I use Abaca pulp, which is a pulp that I can buy. There are other pulps you can get, and I mix it with methyl cellulose. It's actually a procedure or a technique that I learned from Sarah Garden Armstrong, and she's in Alabama, in Birmingham, Alabama, I believe, but has amazing resources available. So it's mixing, instead of mixing the degree of pulp and water, which is how I would pull a sheet of paper, you add a lot of methyl cell. And then that creates kind of more of an oozy feeling texture. And when you pour it, the two things come together, and that's what lets it stick. You can pour it on plastic, and it's incredible because it dries, peel it off, and then you can start layering with it. But with fabric and different wet sheets, it's really fun because you can play with whether the pigment disperses or whether it stays, because you can use something called retention aid that either, and I don't use retention aid because I want to see that color seep out and go in different places.
Yes, Jeannie, we knew. We're ready, Jeannie, they're ready.
Okay, you had a lot about process, material, technique. If you had to identify a process or material technique to sort of speak for you, to symbolize you in your practice, what would it be for each of you?
Well, that's easy for me because it's the paper pulp on the fabric. That's become, and I'm starting to now work with, thanks to, I'm forgetting all names today, so anyway, thanks to Stodge, I started working with the pigment and pulp paint on, it's basically like row cover, I think it's called, and it's a recycled material that's used with organic farms, and it's just incredible to see what happens with it. So, but that represents me for sure.
And I just want to make sure I heard you correctly because it's far back. You are wanting to know what process or technique represents our practice, yes? Okay. For me, it's cyanotype. I incorporate it into a lot of my photographic works and sculptural works now. It is a process I've become very, very familiar with, and it's very dear to me.
I would say the sculpting process, the preliminary sculpting specifically, because it is my time where I get to let all of my emotion out and then dial it back to get those fine details.
Pick one process.
I
Well, I'm going to go back to my roots and say textiles, because I think you can do a lot of different processes with them. I can't pick one process. You've seen my work. So, but yeah, I think the beauty is experimenting with many processes and having that conversation with them. You don't always know, and that's part of the journey.
I'm going to give a half answer. I think the process that most emblematic of my work is the act of listening, more so. Since a lot of my work stems from kind of stillness and contemplation, you have to be ready to receive whatever. So just sort of trying to be constantly in the moment, and frequently that has meant I don't end up documenting something as it happens. I saw a bald eagle getting attacked by crows the other day while the song Freedom by Pharrell Williams was blasting. It was perfect, and my phone was in my pocket. So I didn't get it, so that's fine. But the experience happened, and so maybe I can use that continuously, that energy for my work, or maybe that's just a fun little thing that I got to experience either way. Being able to be ready to listen and receive as I say them.
Thank you, Jeannie.
I have a question for you guys. So as you're sitting here and we have first years, second years, and others in the audience, what's your advice for them now that you're at this stage and literally at this stage of finishing up your MFA? What's your advice?
I'll start. No, play in the studio and play outside.
If you're in your second year, start thinking about what you're doing next year, like now, and use the summer to start getting a footing. First years, play, like Lynn said, truly.
best part of this?
Remember to take breaks and play Minecraft. It's very important to your mental health.
For sure, Minecraft, not D&D.
Well, you can do D&D, Minecraft, or Cult of the Lamb is good too.
Yep.
Okay.
Just be easy on yourself. You don't have to figure all of this out this year, or today, or next month. This is just part of the journey that you're taking. So you just keep making, and know that all of that work that you do, none of it's wasted. And have fun, yeah, and start thinking about what you're going to be working on. No, enjoy your time here. Talk with as many of the faculty and staff that you can. We have a really incredible privilege to be at this university and around working faculty that are in the arts and out there making art and talking with other artists. Don't miss the presentations. Don't miss the artist visits. It's so important, and that's what I would say.
We're going to get a lot of advice and critiques from absolutely everyone, faculty, other students, students that are below you, I should say, great honor. Receive all of it, and then choose what to ignore later. But make sure you get it all.
Yes.
Okay, maybe this is hard, maybe this is easy, but you're at this point, congratulations. You achieved what you were here for. And what else next? Where do you see yourself as the next step?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that too. What's next after this? And I know some of you have some great things coming up, so.
Well, for me, short term, I am going to I'm going to be a studio assistant in Penland for 1 week in a papermaking artist, so I'm really excited about that. I am moving back to Raleigh with my family, and then maybe work at Wake Tech, teaching, and always making. I'm trying to find studio space right now, or figure out what studio space looks like when I lose my studio, and just keep making and keep plugging away, trying to get residencies and keep working.
My main goal is to teach at the college level, specifically photography. I'm hoping if all goes well the rest of the semester to be here teaching intro level, so we'll see. But also continuing to make and play a lot more in photo in the darkroom, because I've learned this semester while teaching my intro class that I really miss the darkroom, even though I hate the smells in there. Yeah, but hopefully still being around here and bugging everybody. So.
Okay, shameless plug. I'm going to be at Art Fields on Saturday giving a talk, so my piece is going to be there. But I'm also planning on sticking around here, planning on teaching 3D design. Eventually, I plan on doing some residencies and essentially going full teaching, but we'll see. We'll see.
What am I doing? I don't have a clue. I'm gonna go home and visit with my parents and relish the fact that I was able to finish this and be thankful for all of the people that I have met along this journey and see where the universe wants me to land. So I don't know yet, but you will know when I do.
I have a residency in Sweden coming up around the summer solstice, and another one in Norway for the fall equinox. And in between those two, I will be living in my car in rural maritime Canada. After that, no clue.
We probably have time for one more question. Any other questions? Yes.
Just looking at all the pieces, like all the big and like seemingly loose pieces, how was like just putting that all in the expedition was like? That seems like a process.
As far as getting it into the museum, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll start this because Reese and I had to turn ours in early. Getting it ready was like a marathon sprint to make sure you had it ready to go into the museum. You get it there, and then we left for a week and hoped for the best. But getting it there from our studios, for me, I have a big installation, so it came down in pieces. And then when we got back from our trip, I had to assemble it in the museum. So, yeah.
My story is about the same. It's just a bunch of animals that I just put onto a cart and then paraded them through the hallways to the museum. And then once we got back, I was able to set up the full installations.
So when we started this process, we would meet once a week, much to our chagrin, to talk about all of this, because we're not just putting stuff in the museum, we're working with another entity about moving our work there and all of the stuff that happens when you have that relationship with a gallery or a museum. So that was part of it. And then sitting and talking together about what pieces do we want? How are we going to show our pieces together? And what are we trying to say? So I think there was a lot of collaboration with a lot of different faculty and museum staff, and with ourselves. And we've been together for 3 years, so we know each other pretty well, unfortunately. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It was a really wonderful process. I can say that honestly. Yeah, I don't have one thing to complain about.
Yeah, I would say it was a perfect combination
Yeah.
of really intense planning and then also a lot of flexibility. So it was like a mesh of both of those.
Yeah.
Anything on this is really.
Great. Well, that gets us a few minutes before 5 o'clock, so we can head to the museum